It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
My friend Irwin.
So we have to go. All right, here I go again. Maybe, you know what I was thinking? I think I'm going to get all of this out of the way in the beginning. There'll be a lot of segues. We segue a lot on Our Hamptons.
I know, but it's all an adventure and it's all good.
It's all an adventure. And we have to also resurrect this Our Hamptons tagline. What you're going to hear is not ancient history.
Yeah, truism.
Right? So we're going to go to Leisurama. And here's the third part of that trifecta. I love this story.
It's fascinating. I mean, just the name alone, come on, Leisurama, does that not, it's evocative of 1960s.
No question.
Or late 50s, but definitely 60s.
No question about it. And it's a Leisurama that it's really early 1960s Montauk, but it goes a little beyond that because Esperanza, listen to the cast of characters we're going to talk about in this thing. Okay. I know you have this probably in front of you. Yes, we do have a little bit of an outline here. So, but we have the architect, Andrew Geller. We have the industrial designer, Raymond Loewy. Now, Raymond Loewy is not a household name, but back in the day when it meant something, Raymond Loewy was on the cover of Time magazine.
Oh yeah. He was the man. As far as design, yeah, absolutely.
That's big time. Okay. So, and then we had the developer of Leisurama, a guy named Herbert Sadkin. Now let's throw these two into the mix, Esperanza. How about Richard Nixon and Nikita Khruschev? This is all part of the story.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Crazy. And to round this bunch out, let's throw the marketing director, William Safire, who was probably better known as a presidential speechwriter and a New York Times columnist. And to round this all out, so in the same sentence of Andrew Geller, Richard Nixon, Nikita Khruschev, we have the Montauk legend and Leisurama sales manager, Frank Tuma.
Tuma. I mean, Tuma is it's like Montauk nobility, isn't it?
It's Montauk nobility, Montauk royalty, no question about it. Old fishing family, but he also a prominent real estate family. They had the Tuma, I don't know if it's still there, the Tuma agency, which was in Montauk for a very long time. So he was in charge of the sales. So, but I do think as always, we do have to give a little bit of a background of what Leisurama was, and we're going to tie this all in because people, you have to say to yourself, what does Nikita Khruschev have to do with Leisurama? Well, we're going to tell you.
And Montauk, for that matter.
And Montauk. So Leisurama was essentially inexpensive prefabbed homes that were available for purchase. And, you know, the real storyline with Leisurama, now this is before Esperanza's time. I was a little boy, would not have known anything about this. But in the early 1960s, these were inexpensive prefabbed houses, were able to be purchased from Macy's department store in the early 1960s. So we'll get into this a little bit more a little later on in this podcast, but people went into Macy's on Herald Square to buy a shirt and ended up buying a house.
I was explaining this to my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, and I said, well, picture this. You walk into Macy's to buy underwear,
right? And
you walk out having bought a house.
Yeah, it's just
crazy. Only in the United States of America.
Only in the United, and there you have, this was not planned, but that is such an amazing segue that you just did. Only in the United States of America, because the precursor to this, okay, to the final design of Leisurama, which the architect Andrew Geller, he could be the subject of an entire segment in and of himself.
Yes,
really a prominent modernist architect, but he was very involved in the Leisurama experience. And this design was shown at a 1959 American National Exhibition in Moscow. And this was a really very historical moment in time. This was the Cold War,
Right.
communism versus democracy. And
Capitalism, yeah.
exactly. And it was a kitchen debate between then Vice President Nixon and the Soviet premier, Nikita Khruschev. And they went back and forth over, the merits of communism versus capitalism.
Right. And it was the kitchen debate because they were in the model home of one of these Leisuramas that was being exhibited at this.
Exactly.
Right?
So before this Leisurama got to Montauk, this Leisurama was in Moscow. This is just
and Herald Square,
right, and Macy's Roosevelt Field, in addition to the
Right.
plaza in Montauk where you could have bought these. But this is just it's a remarkable story, and so Nixon and Khrushchev, and there's a really an amazing picture of this. Also, you could see in the midst.
There's
of
a whole
this,
video clip, by the way, too.
And there's a video clip of it, and also we'll probably, when this airs, we'll probably attach some of these pictures. But standing in the background was the next Soviet premier, Leonid Brezhnev, watching this. It was just the whole thing. And again, at the time, there used to be a Soviet news agency called TASS, TASS, and their quote at the time was, "There's no more truth in showing this is the typical home of the American worker than, say, in showing the Taj Mahal as the typical home of a Bombay textile worker."
Oh my gosh, that's so perfect. Is
that perfect? So they were doing their Cold War spin, if you will, while of course Richard Nixon was, this is a modest little house for the United States, right? And so that's sort of what this whole thing was. But anyway, so that's really the cool history of it. But now if we get back to Leisurama itself.
And Montauk, I mean, let's take it to Montauk. This is where it gets really interesting. I mean, I have to bring in, I have this book, which you could consider a coffee table book, by Alistair Gordon, and it's called Weekend Utopia, Modern Living in the Hamptons. And it does have a chapter devoted to this era, this period in time, and talks about the Leisurama. And it was just a really interesting idea of how this Cold War period, there was this selling of the American dream, basically, that you would work hard, but you could also play hard. That any, lower to, middle class, lower middle class to middle class could afford to have a second home. Exactly. I mean, this was what was incredible. Yeah, capitalism at its best, right? You can work, but come the weekend, you can escape to your second home and enjoy, the bounties of that place.
And to that point, that was really almost like a microcosm of 1960s America. It was the early 60s. Remember, this was President Kennedy. You had a White House that they termed it Camelot. You had this young family in the White House. He spoke of ask not what you could do for your country, all of that, and talked about putting a man on the moon within the decade, which actually did happen. It was, I guess it was the promise and an era of possibilities.
That's right.
And believe me, that was these people, these developers, that's exactly what they were capitalizing on, the American dream, because we should really talk about the actual models of the houses. And this is really a dialogue that has really been a continuing dialogue on our Hamptons, how Esperanza uses this term all the time, amenities. Why do we need all of these amenities? Why do houses need outdoor kitchens and wine cellars and every other thing, when aren't we here to be outside and to commune with nature? And Well, Esperanza, to your point, the Leisurama convertible, which was the basic model. There were three models, three Leisurama models. We're going to touch on them now. There was the convertible, the expanded convertible, and the villa. But the convertible was a 730 square foot studio with a Murphy bed.
That nowadays would be considered like a tiny house.
That's the primary bedroom closet. Basically.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yes.
Right. But this entire house was 730 square feet with a Murphy bed, and they gave you a mahogany screen, and that was the divider to sort of segregate the spaces, so it didn't feel like you were just in one big studio, which essentially you were in one big studio.
Talk about open concept living, huh?
It was open concept living, the essence of open concept living. But this essence of open concept living in 1964 cost $13,000, $490 down with a $73 a month mortgage for 30 years. So to your point, this was every man for every person.
I mean, it sounds that way. I don't know what that means in current day money, but it certainly seems like it was accessible enough that 200 of these were built in Montauk.
Exactly right. And now, just to give everyone the other sizes, you could upgrade a little bit, which was the expanded convertible, was 950 square feet. That had a second bathroom. And, the running joke was a lot of these people, these were predominantly middle-class, urbanites from New York City. Their apartment in Brooklyn had one bathroom. They were coming out here. It was a second bathroom. This was
luxury, really.
This was unheard of. I mean,
right?
My mother slept in a bedroom in Brooklyn with her two brothers till she got married. I mean, this was something that was unheard of. And then there was a third model called the Villa. Only wasn't very popular, maybe because of the price point. It was $17,000. There were only 4 of these built. These were 1,200 square feet and with planned as a rental suite. But basically, the models here were the convertible and the expanded convertible. But now, let's talk about how they marketed these houses, Esperanza.
Yeah, I'm just so curious. I mean, and what the role that Frank Tuma played in this also.
It's such a fascinating story, and not just fascinating, it was beyond brilliant if you look at it, because Herbert Sadkin, the developer, teamed up with Macy's, and the concept was this house is furnished right down to the dishes and the toothbrushes.
Yeah, like color coordinated everything, right?
Color coordinated toothbrushes. They like sort of like their advertising campaign is bring your 6-pack and you're ready to roll. I mean,
and your fishing rod,
and that's all it was. And you brought up Alistair Gordon,
yes.
And I read a quote, your book from that book, where he said, Sadkin dreamed of making millions building, and here we go again, Esperanza, building Levittown with sand.
Or
Levittown. Honestly, I feel bad, but I mean, it's not my words. It's Alistair Gordon's. You could take it up. You could take it up with him. So now we have to bring Frank Tuma in. Now, William Safire, we didn't touch on too much, but Herb Sadkin hired William Safire to be the marketing agent, and then hired Andrew Geller to design the homes at Macy's and build it on Long Island. And they leveraged the whole Russian experience, the whole kitchen debate. They used all of this in the marketing because it was like very avant-garde. I mean, the whole thing, if you put yourself here early 1960s, it's just a remarkable story. But so they furnished it down to the toothbrushes, and they brought in, as the general sales manager, to their credit, they didn't bring some up island person. They brought a Montauk guy in.
Locally sourced. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Locally sourced. And so I read a story about Frank Tuma in here about this. And initially, when he first heard this thing, he said, one of the craziest things I've ever heard. This is what kind of wacky idea is this?
I bet. Yeah, I would do that even today.
Could you imagine selling houses in a department store? But meanwhile, Frank Tuma sold 200 of these houses in 6 weeks.
In 6 weeks.
In 6 weeks, and he contended, and I think I might have read this even in his obituary, like an article about him. After he passed away a few years ago, he contended he could have sold 4 times as many.
Yeah. Well, so Sadkin
Yes.
had bought the land, right? And that was property in what is known as Culloden Point.
Culloden Shores,
Culloden Point.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So he had bought the land. And so when people would go into the Macy's, they would get sold on this idea, and that included the land, right?
Correct.
So you would be buying the house with the land, and that was for $17,000 with the land.
$17,000 if you wanted the villa, which was that was the top of the line.
Oh, right. So $13,000 with the land.
Those were the most common ones: the $13,000 convertible and the $15,000 expanded convertible. Those were the most common ones that were sold, and and you could see there used to be a film on Vimeo that for whatever reason they took off, but you could see these and people relaying the stories of when you were telling your daughter about it. Yeah. They literally went into Macy's to buy a blender to buy.
I saw one. The woman said, the husband says she went in to buy a brassiere.
Yeah, exactly. and they ended up buying. It's just,
yeah.
And so again, they were selling this dream and marketed it to the T, but as always, there were some results to this.
Negative or positive?
Well, both. I mean, first of all, at the time, and again, now Montauk always, we spoke about this in a previous episode, had the unhampton vibe and unhampton image. But even Montauk, they said, wow, this is sort of, what's the right word I'm looking for? They thought it was a little bit lowbrow.
Okay.
I don't know how to count exactly.
Even in Montauk, really.
Even in Montauk, they said, wow. And
well, we have to remember Montauk, despite the fact that it may be unhamptons, was almost the, Miami Beach of the North, right? So there was that.
Exactly. And there were.
And you have, still the Montauk Association with all those beautiful houses. There were summer cottages.
You had that element. You had the Montauk Yacht Club and
the Montauk Manor.
So there was still.
So people look down their noses on this.
A little bit. And again, this was, I mean, you physically have been in this neighborhood, right?
Yeah. No, and I mean, I'm trying to picture because Sadkin planned 2,000 of these,
exactly,
and only stopped at the 200 because it wasn't profitable. So, I mean, I can't even picture 2,000 of these jammed in there.
Yeah, I mean, unless he was planning on expanding, because this is now again, these are. It's really a fantastic neighborhood, and it's got an absolutely beautiful private beach that anyone there can walk to. Any house is walking distance to, it's a bay beach. I guess that's on Fort Pond Bay, I would think.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yes. So, beautiful. I went there a week or two ago, just to walk around there, knowing that this was coming. We were going to do something like this, and I wanted to familiarize myself, which we'll get to present day shortly, but it really was, every house was walking distance, again, to your no amenities. You didn't need amenities because you were steps to a gorgeous beach.
Right. And also you have, someone like Alistair Gordon, whose family also had a kit house similar to this in Amagansett, a different company. But one thing that he wrote about that experience in this book, The Weekend Utopia, he said, smallness and simplicity of the houses, right, of these houses that forced one to experience nature firsthand, to learn tolerance, and even to become closer knit as a family. It's like an interesting thing. When not only that, you realized, he wrote about his experience with their house, like they realized, it was really small, kind of cramped and everything. But once they started living in it, they realized the access and the view that they had of the outdoors and the access to nature, and it kind of forced you to be outside as opposed to being, cocooned in your
Correct.
house, right?
And
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was so interesting, considering nowadays your house sizes are so large.
in Esperanza, I think we're going to close on this because I think we have to devote a little more time to the present day and what's going on there now. But to your exact point of what Alistair Gordon was saying, we recently spoke about the Sands community now in Sag Harbor. And it's interesting how, and again, I guess it's of its time, evocative of its time. Sands was also, 1950s. Right, this was a few years later, early 60s, but it really is a metaphor for the then versus now. How then in Sands, then in Montauk at Leisurama in Culloden Point, the houses were small.
Yeah.
The Sands houses were downright mansions next to these. I mean, 730 square feet. I mean, Sands was whatever, 1,200 square feet. So, and to what Alistair Gordon was saying, was very reminiscent to what we were discussing, what Mr. Pickens was saying, William Pickens, how the houses, it was about being outside. It was about family. It was about the friends. It was about community. Leisurama, I would bet, at that era, at that time, it was about community as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure of it. Yeah. I know it was a neighborhood, where all the kids would be outside in the streets or, going from one house to another, just like you're saying, and Mr. Pickens described, I bet. And that's the beauty of, again, a place like this that when we'll, I'm sure, discuss this further, but I wonder how much of that is really left.
And on that note, that's going to be.
We're going to continue to be continued.
I think we have to do a continued to be continued, Esperanza, because there's a lot to talk about.
It's so much.
And about that, but good segue, by the way, to get us to that point, as usual. Thank you for this.
Well, Irwin, always a pleasure. Can't wait to continue this.
I'm right there with you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.